University. We have Dr. Faries, also Associate Professor of Creative Writing here at Savannah State University, and our distinguished guest, poet Frank X. Walker. So we'll jump right into it. I'm going to let you go ahead and finish the story about challenging one of the former poets that visited Savannah State here to do some better work. So tell us about that.
Well, Maria Dessa and I and about 40 other people were at a winter retreat for young writers, young as in not age, but as in closer to novice, with a nice mixture of experienced writers, just trying to share the wealth and trying to help everybody get to a stronger place and closer to publishing and to share secrets to surviving in the industry and recommending MFA programs if that's what they needed, or publishing houses or conferences to go to. So it was a really good time. And it closed with a reading, a public reading. And she read one or two, maybe two of her letters. And I was just blown away. I'd heard about them, but never had heard them. And to hear it live and have her energy behind it, it just moved me to insist that be somewhere on the way to being a book, like immediately. And I just refused to accept that she was thinking about it, or she wasn't as close as I thought she should have been. So I put a little pressure on her, and then made an arrangement to acquire numerous copies as soon as they were available in advance, so they were able to actually pay to finish the book. But I think everybody responded that way. My good friend and colleague, Dr. Curlew, actually was one of the editors of the book and spent real time on the ground, going through every single line. And I think I still have several hundred copies in my car that when I travel around, I give them away to young writers. A lot of young people who are interested in activism ask me questions that the best answer is just to give them that book. And I think there's nothing more powerful than to have a tool that not only gives you instructions on how to do what you only dream about, but show you in the ways it's been done before. And then gives you even more stuff on top of that. I think that's what you get with her book.
I think that, so since we're talking about this, to contextualize this conversation, Kameelah, maybe you could read one from our literary journal. So this is our literary journal, Estuary, and we framed this particular one with one of these letters that we're talking about from Maria Dessa Giritali. And maybe this one here, letter 14, Dear Continuum.
Sounds good to me.
And it's kind of a neat way to start our conversation, I think.
All right. Letter 14. Dear Continuum, do I think suffering is a prerequisite for great artistry? No, I don't. What I think is that most people suffer at some point. The artist just dares to admit it. I think awareness, empathy, strong observation skills, and the ability to listen deeply are necessary tools for any artist. Wisdom, coupled with the ability to admit that you really don't know much of anything, are also instruments that will help you shape your art. Do you ever listen to the blues? If not, I recommend you dip your toes in the sounds of Big Mama Thornton, Bessie Smith, Ida Cox, Howlin' Wolf, Leadbelly, and Son House. In Uses of the Blues, James Baldwin writes that, quote, blues contain the toughness that manages to make our experiences articulate, end quote. The blues is a testimony to our survival, strength, beauty, ugly, and humor. It's a map, and the mere singing of it is the key. To navigate this sometimes rocky terrain of life, we have to tell our stories. In that same essay, Baldwin writes, quote, you don't know what the river is like or what the ocean is like by standing on the shore. You can't know anything about life and suppose you can get through it clean, end quote. Let me know what you think this means. Continuum. When life is everything that the movies told you it would be, right. When life threatens to shatter you and rip your illusions to shreds, right. When you are distracted by romance, right. When you are consumed by heartache, right. When you are rejoicing, grieving, questioning, certain, right. Life itself will give you a chance to feel everything. I've never set a fire to feel flames singe me. I already know flames will come. So will water. One. Mariah Dessa. That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
They are. The whole book is.
A good coda to a literary magazine full of student art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks quite substantial. Is this from one whole year?
It's substantial because it ended up being 2 years.
Yeah.
Well, that explains it. 'Cause
Okay.
that's
So the next one's
Quite
gonna
a
be half as
tome.
big.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
War and Peace over here.
Yeah.
Right, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well,
Well, great. Well, yeah, go ahead.
to back up a little bit, we know that you are the founder of one of the founders of the Appalachian Poets, and so I wanted you to talk a little bit about that term. Can you define it and tell us what Appalachian is all about?
Well, to appreciate Appalachia, you have to start with Appalachia and understand that most people respond to Appalachia by the stereotype that is advanced by mass media, which is a region of the country that is the poorest in the nation, that is culturally backwards, that is unlettered, almost illiterate, and homogeneously white. That there are no people of color in that space. That's the definition that mass media sells, and they're not even stereotypes; they're actually caricatures by now, because most of those are not true for all 13 states. You can find pockets of that truth, but it doesn't represent the whole. The truth is that same space is also the same home of Nina Simone, of Carter G. Woodson, the father of African American history, of Bill Withers, of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, of Roberta Flack, Jesse Owens, August Wilson. I mean, so much African American culture that if you put that on top of all those stereotypes, little Abner starts to disappear. So when we use the word Appalachia, it's to insist that you look at the same region and acknowledge that people of color live there and are from there. And not just now, but historically. We're there mining coal, we're there with Native Americans. Native Americans represent some of that forced Appalachian definition too. I started a group called the Appalachian Poets, and that's a group of multicultural writers, multi-ethnic, Puerto Rican, Chinese American, we had 2 honorary white members in the very first year we formed. There was a young woman who was Lebanese American who was a member of the group. But the word does one thing, the writing group does the other. And the writing group existed, kind of forced the literary community in the region to make room for us. When I first tried to be part of that literary scene, it was very established and very clear that it was a whites-only enterprise. And so our organization pushed back against that. When we would go to events and we would say, why aren't there any black writers represented? They would always say, we don't know any, or there aren't any. And we would look around at each other, all writers of color, saying, are we invisible? Do we not exist? So our history, our formation comes out of that space of trying to make our own selves visible, and force them to acknowledge that we exist. And now it's we're happy to know that word is in the Oxford American Dictionary. That there probably isn't a Appalachian Studies program anywhere in the country that when they study diversity, that they don't have to say Appalachia. That one of our many books aren't used as a supplemental textbook. That we tour extensively, and one of the places we go every year is Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. In fact, I'll be there Thursday night with 4 other members of the group. And there are over 30 of us by now, since the 25 years ago we were formed. And we've had one of the oldest active writing groups of color in the country. And most of the founding members are now university professors or part of other writing programs at University of South Carolina, Nikki Finney, Kelly Norman Ellis at Chicago State University, Paul Taylor at Penn State University, Mitch Douglas is at IUPUI in Minneapolis, I'm at the University of Kentucky, Ricardo Nazario Colon is at Western Carolina University. So we're all over the region, and some outside the traditional definition of what the Appalachia is, but we recognize out migrants, places like Cincinnati and Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh is still in Appalachia. But those other cities, because of the industry and job available there, have large, traditionally Appalachian communities because people move there to get jobs, but they still stay connected to home. They might even work there and then die and want to be buried back home. And most of them still own at least a piece of the original family's property if they own land at all. So it's something we're very proud of, and to have been around and alive for 25 years, actively writing and publishing and teaching, and forcing people to see us has been part of our movement in the world. I think it's fair to say.
Wonderful. Well, you anticipated my next question about the 25th anniversary of the group. So I'll switch gears a little bit. Speaking of people, forcing people to see the group, word on the street is that the group was awarded the 2016 Governor's Award in the Arts, to which the group responded by outright rejecting that award. Could you tell us a little bit about that controversy?
Well, I mean, to us, it was an easy response, automatic response. In Kentucky just elected a Republican governor whose policies have been anti-everything that the African Report stands for politically. We consider ourselves not just poets, but many of us are very comfortable claiming to be artist activists, and we're champions of the marginalized, the disadvantaged, of the poor, whatever color they are. His policies, try to decriminalize ex-felons, try to keep them out of the voting process. His policies tried to penalize poor people and remove a brand new privilege they had, which was health care. He wanted to take it away because it wasn't his. It wasn't his political party's gift to he wanted to put his own spin on it and take it away. So between his criminal justice stance, his politics around health care, his position on the minimum wage and not wanting to raise it, it was easy to find his 5 major initiatives to be anti the people we valued and loved and wrote about. So it took us 5 minutes to figure out that we couldn't take his award. We didn't want anything with his name on it because it might look like we were, we sanctioned or we agreed with anything he did. So we met on the phone and online, and we crafted a press release and released it 2 days after the announcement on Facebook, and it almost went viral in like 12 hours. But what amazed us is that there were so many people who agreed with us that were almost waiting for somebody to say, you can say no. You can say that I think that's wrong. And that kind of energy, was probably right on time. So there's a kind of activism growing in Kentucky. Kentucky is a traditional red state, which has a very strong chance of voting blue this presidential election. And part of it, we take credit for is this new activism among the artist class in Kentucky, which is a very large, vocal, active voting public. Probably due to the fact that Kentucky has one of the largest governor's schools for the arts and governor's scholars program in the country, even more than North Carolina. They have their own campus and more than New York City. And they have all those arts in New York City, but Kentucky, for whatever reasons, has always invested a lot in the arts. And those 35 years of young artists now working and living in the state are voting, and they've galvanized around this idea that artists have a voice, and they're speaking up. So we're looking for some exciting change come November 8th.
So are we.
Right.
So, yeah, to piggyback on that, as a fellow poet, so you're choosing poetry to communicate these feelings and these political things and so on. Why poetry? Why not essays or visual arts, or are other people in the Appalachian movement doing that?
We have artists of every genre.
Okay.
And I'm actually a multidisciplinary artist. I'm best known as a poet, but I'm trained as a fiction writer. I've finished my first novel, and it's been edited right now. My first publishing success was in short fiction. My first book, Appalachia, was supposed to be a combination of short stories and poetry. And then when the editors got all the poems, they wanted to see more poems. They liked the poems so much, they decided to delay the short stories and just publish the poems. And then 16,000 copies later, they're still about to put out the 10th edition of that book. And still are sitting on the short stories, which I've even forgotten by now. I don't even, I can barely remember what they were about. But I write plays. I had my most recent play was staged again 2 months ago in my hometown of Danville at the Frank X. Walker Literary Festival. It's a play about Isaac Murphy, the African-American jockey. But I've written a dozen plays. My first real job in the world was as a journalist in Tennessee. I don't think of myself as a poet, but as a writer. And before even a writer, as an artist activist, because I also make visual art. Make mostly photography now, but there was a time when I paid the rent and paid for my daughter's food with the art I made with my hands. And I just don't have time to do that anymore. Because I was trying to be an administrator, an artist, and a writer, and be alive at the same time. And so something I always suffered because I spread myself too thin. And I consciously made a decision to stop making visual art and focus on writing so I could produce something, because I was always not finishing stuff. And I was laughing because, I was like, we got to make sure to find all the places where the old bio, the bio is so old and undated because we went 2 years without updating the website. A lot of people have the information, but it's now 8 books and over 400 places presenting that. But I always laugh when I hear that because I think, wow, I went 2 years without updating that website. It's my fault. But and that's evidence of being overcommitted and trying to take on too much and really trying to get to it eventually. It was my excuse. I was always trying to put out fires. I felt like a website, it was never on fire until you go somewhere and they introduce you. And it's 2 years out of date, and it's your fault. Ouch. But thanks to good people in my life, they're trying to fix those things. I have a brand new website that's been updated, and I think it needs updating on a regular basis, it seems, but I think that, I think people are always surprised that I don't use an agent, or I don't have handlers. I just give out my email address or phone number, and try to keep up with it all. But,
So can I do a follow-on?
sure.
So so that's great, you work in multiple genres, and because of that, do you feel then that poetry, getting back to the idea of poetry, is there anything in poetry that has maybe that there's something there that you can communicate through poetry that maybe you can't communicate through a short story, through your visual arts, through something like that? Is there something that makes poetry unique in its capacity to communicate some of these issues of social justice and so on that you address?
I don't know that poetry is privileged over other art forms. I think it may be the most accessible. It might be the most broadly used language that people speak. I think of poetry as a language. What I like about poetry is the economy. Is that you have the privilege and challenge to capture everything you get in a 2.5 hour long movie, but you only have 14 lines or 17 syllables.
Mhm.
But you still have to give people that opening and closing, that building, to something, and then that solution at the end. You can't cheat people just because it's short.
Right.
But I think it makes it harder to do. It's harder to produce, but it's more satisfying when you've done it. I think I turned to poetry because I could get results easier. If I just said I'm a fiction writer, then I'd be introduced always as a failed fiction writer and not a poet at all. Because that novel has not come out yet. Nobody's seen it but my editors. But because you can write a poem in a day or an hour, depending on the length of it, and there's so many places to publish these days. So many things online. Now that online forums are respected. When I first came into teaching in the academy, you couldn't mention that you had a poem published online. People would laugh at you. You couldn't count that towards tenure. But now they're very well respected journals online, and they do count. And between that and Kinko's, anybody can call themselves a poet and then prove that they're being published in the same breath. But I think which makes it harder and puts more pressure on other writers to distinguish themselves from people who went to a poetry reading and said I could do that, and the next day they introduced themselves as a poet without any training, or having not read any other poets, or may have only written 3 poems in their entire life, but now they're a poet. How do you separate those from the chads in the world? So I think that's.
How do you do that?
Well,
Because it's tough. I think about that too. And it happens with poetry so much. Like nobody paints a picture and then the next day says,
I'm
I'm a painter, I'm a visual artist. But they'll write a poem and the next day. And I don't want to discourage those people. I want them to feel strong and be excited about poetry and keep moving forward. But yeah, somebody who's practiced for 30 years, I surely feel like I feel like there's something that I need to earn. I need to, poetry is practice, a lot of practice. You don't strum a chord on the guitar and the next day you're in a rock and roll band, So how do you feel about that?
Well, I think there's room for, I think my thing is, how could we, if we can stoke the enthusiasm for people, the world needs poets and needs poetry. There's a lot of ugly in the world that needs healing, that needs, rubbing out. If we could fix it with poems, then let's fix it. And I think that for me, my students probably motivate me the most as far as wanting to write. I get an amazing student who's writing circles around the person I was at the same age. I'm thinking I got to work harder. So it's put pressure on me to really push myself and my work, and probably maybe more prolific. I mean, I don't know a lot of poets who write as much as I do. You know, I just had a book come out last month. I have another book that's finished. I just haven't found the time to put it together and to turn it in. And by the time I do that, there'll be another book. But it's because I'm writing all the time, and I'm writing all the time because I'm in this creative space that's fueled by students, you know, reading their work. You know, once a month I'll read something and say, I wish I had written that. You know? And I don't want them to catch me, you know, I've got to, you know, I got to stay ahead. But you know, I think it's I don't really worry about that. You know, I worry if students are not reading. You know, if young people call themselves poets, and I say, well, what have you read? What are you reading? And they can't answer that. You know, I'm really trying to find a nice way of saying, stop calling yourself a poet. If you don't read poetry, don't call you, you know, at least say you're reading your own work, you know, be that arrogant that. I had a friend who was a comedian, and I said, well, you know, what other comedians do you like? He said, I don't watch other comedians. I don't want to be influenced, you know, I just want to be myself. I was thinking, well, you would never get better unless you know what else is being produced. And he just refused to sit that way. It's like, no, it'll taint me somehow. So I think that's like, you can't do that in poetry. You need to know what's out there. You need to be reading. And there's so many exciting things happening in poetry right now. I'm in love with all these new forms, the contrapuntal, for instance. And if you look at the work of Tammy Jess, you know, he was just at UK, and you know, he did a slide presentation to show what his new work looked like on the page. He put it on the big screen, and to see a crown of sonnets all connected, and to see him connect these sonnets that can be read, you know, up and down and diagonal across the page and still make sense. Just, I mean, it's like it was a calculus. We should have been at a math conference. I'm like, this is a long way from, you know, the haikus I learned when I was in the 10th grade. This is rocket science now, and it's still poetry. You know, so, you know, seeing where poetry is and heading, and being part of what I think is, you know, will be a respected new genre as soon as libraries and publishers decide that, you know, there's enough historical poetry to name it that category and give it its own shelf in the bookstore. You know, we've made some progress, but you know, I feel good knowing that I'm the only person who has 4 historical books of poetry. Right. Or even 3, maybe even 2. You know, I think Marilyn Nelson is in second right now. We've been keeping pace. And when the New York book comes out, you know, I'll get a bigger lead on Marilyn because I have 5. But it's not a contest. You know, the contest is our collective effort to make the parties that be who make that call say, yes, historical poetry is a legitimate genre of poetry and deserves its own space and shelf. And here are all the ones that qualify. I mean, it doesn't hurt that, you know, they make the final list for National Book Awards. You know, Adrian Matejic's book about Jack Johnson from last year, you know, almost won the National Book Award and was nominated for the Pulitzer also. You know, so that really helped our cause. So it's getting a lot more respect. They're being used a lot, in, not just in English classes, but you know, my books are used as supplemental history texts.
Right. I want to go back to something that you said about poetry as a healing balm, particularly as we're thinking about this historical poetry and what it can do in a classroom. And I taught Turn Me Loose last spring, and something really interesting happened by being able to walk these students who were, for the most part, unfamiliar with Medgar Evers, unfortunately. They were able to walk through this collection to get this story and feel very deeply about not just Ed Evers and his sacrifice, but that collective community, a community that they now feel a part of in terms of looking at this text as a type of healing. So I'm curious about other than wanting to tell a story, tell the story that people don't hear, tell it from a different perspective. What else is the purpose behind, a whole collection around a single person or a single incident? Is the intent to heal? Is the intent to simply just open up new ways of seeing the story? I'm curious, how do you think of your poetry as a healing poem, the possibility of healing?
Well, I think that it is very intentional. And I think that it's not often I get to talk about even the details of Turn Me Loose. Because some people only look at it in a very one-dimensional way. But for me, the most important thing about Turn Me Loose is the architecture of the book. The book itself is actually built on two songs. It built on Dixie and Strange Fruit. And the lyrics from those two songs are pulled out in our section heads all the way through the book. And then it sets up this conversation between this dark thing and this lighter force all the way through the book, so that you get the voice of the assassin followed by the voice of the widow in the same space. And it allows you to be in this conversation about race when it connects with violence, as a consequence of hatred, all the way through this book, and really interrogate it in such a way that by the end of it, not only are you emotionally exhausted, but hopefully you've experienced something emotional that, whether you know it or not, is a kind of healing, because the book is intentionally structured to kind of mimic, think about what happened in South Africa, with bringing both sides of this old conflict to the same space, to admit these crimes to the victims, and then to get one side to forgive the other and move them closer, and so that both of their lives are less weighted, because now they don't have the guilt of committing the crimes totally, and the others not the pain of never had a chance to face the person who victimized you. That reconciliation, I believe, is modeled in the book on purpose, and it's also why the book ends with a timeline that talks about major clashes around race in America that by now is dated, because it starts with Trayvon Martin, and that page would have been reprinted every 2 months in America since then, since 2013, because it seems like every 2 months since then there's been a new Trayvon Martin in America that's the new rallying cry. But you can see how it's connected, so you can go backwards also, because there are young people who had never connected Trayvon Martin to Emmett Till. So they can see that line, and now Emmett Till is not just a line in a rap song. It's not just something they heard from an era that they don't even acknowledge and have no emotional connection to. He's connected to Trayvon, which they feel deeply about.
Right.
So now they can feel, Emmett Till, and now that whole era is relevant.
Right.
And so what I love about historical poetry, the way it's been written today, is that it allows the reader to, this kind of proximity to the emotional temperature of the event, that makes it more real to them, in a way that you read history and it's kind of dry and you have the facts and you walk away. You read an editorial and this person is very passionate about what happened, and maybe he's even convincing you how to believe. But historical poetry puts both those things in the same space. So experiencing history in a way that reminds you that this is significant and important to you, then you come away thinking, wow, that's... So they don't just learn about Medgar Evers the way you taught it in your classroom. They learn how important he was to the people in his generation, and then they know how important, who that person is in their own generation, and they make the connection. So I love it when kids can see those bridges. If a book of poetry can do that, can build bridges emotionally and historically, it's doing more than poetry was ever supposed to do, according to the definition. But I think that's the value, that's the richness that's waiting for that official genre acknowledgement that's coming at some point. But because I think these books keep coming. I'm not the only one writing them. And between Marilyn Nelson and I, we've got half a shelf covered. But we both know and are working with a bunch of other writers. I have a student in my class now whose first book will be a collection of personal poems about the Negro Baseball League. About one player in particular, Josh Gibson, who he's been writing and working on these poems for 4 years now. I mean, they are amazing. And he studied with Jess and Matijik and Red Miller Nelson, and he's in my classrooms. And so he's learning how to do that and growing as a poet and as a person at the same time. So whatever the question was, I forgot it already.
Oh, I don't know. But I was just going to say that those persona poems, the key is that empathetic element. I mean, that empathy is what you don't get from a historical, a traditional historical text. And that's absolutely the strength of those persona poems,
And you wonder what else is teaching kids to be empathetic. What other classes are they allowed to exercise that?
Yeah.
They were extremely distraught, exhausted.
Good.
After
Excellent.
we grappled with these. They were like, Dr. Martin,
Okay.
what are you doing?
Well, where
to
maybe
us?"
they get it, where they maybe get it, and it's stylized in a way that it may not be very accurate, and that's film.
Right.
Maybe
Right.
these biopics or something like that, in which, that empathy is, like I said, it's really stylized, and it's based off of a reconstruction that may or may not be accurate.
Right.
Probably a reconstruction that was in some false history.
Right, exactly, exactly.
But the difference is, I would say that in film, there's a soundtrack that
Yeah.
tells you how to feel.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
man.
yes.
But you don't get that in the book of poetry. That's
That's
on
true.
you. That's on you.
Yeah. I'm so glad
Yeah.
you say that. It's my biggest frustration with film is the manipulation of its
Oh,
musical soundtrack.
the director will use you. I mean, you will come out there. If he wants you to cry, you're gonna cry.
That's right.
Uh,
And you don't even have to look at an actor. You can just close your eyes.
close your eyes. The
And
music.
listen,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes film powerful. Is this kind of collaboration between all these master art forms. The lighting is superior. The costuming, the set design, the acting, hopefully the writing.
Right.
That's the thing that makes really hold together. And you put all that together in the same space, and add masterful sound and special effects on top of it. I mean, that's why it costs $1 million. But then it's got to win something. It's got to be good, right?
Right, but I'm thinking particularly about your poem on the Confederate flag, right? When we think about image and setup and structure, I think that particular poem, what I did in class was I read one side and I had a student, read the italicized part, and we read it together, and we had to take 5 minutes after reading that. So I think film is great, but I think when you have words and you use them and you shape them and you put them on the page in a certain way, I think you can have an even more profound effect on the way that people emote and respond to it. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think it's important. That, I think for me, I'm trying to get the power of film in a single poem.
Mhm.
I want to manipulate those images. I want people to walk away thinking, damn, what just happened?
right,
You know,
right,
Oof,
that happens.
that knocked the breath out of me. And we had a little bit of that today with some of those poems. And once they started listening, and it's like fishing, and you hook them and you pull them in, really slow, and don't let them off to the very end. Then they go, whoa, what
Right.
just, I didn't expect that. But I think it builds a kind of respect for poetry that young poets can really appreciate. Because I don't know that, when they're, I know people who you say English or poetry to, and they just kind of like wilt and shudder and turn their backs because everything they know about poetry is negative. They had some traumatic experience in high school, so they hate poetry forever. But when kids encounter poetry in a space that makes them feel differently about the world, or to see themselves in a different way, or to see something brand new that was always in front of them, I think it's eye-opening. It could be cathartic for them, and hopefully you make them either respect it enough to read more of it or respect it enough to want to write it their own self.
Chad, last question?
Oh my gosh, last question.
Yes.
I think we went over one question, and I've got like 10 here. Well, we've talked about all of these things. What are some of your influences on your poetry outside the literary world? For example, music, visual arts, exercise, etc. Maybe that, like, are there things like day to day beyond these, like I'm sure you've got a pretty extensive musical collection, right? Pretty extensive book collection. What about things that, like, what are some influences that we would never guess that maybe affect you? Maybe not only your poetry, but your visual arts or, or what have you. Are there some influences there that would surprise us?
Well, I think I guess I don't know what would surprise you. I would say that most people don't know that I dabble in other art forms. I'm a huge fan of film. I actually teach a film course at the university. And music is very important to me as a creative person. When I list my most influential artists, the first 5 are not writers,
Sure.
but they are writers. They're not known as writers.
Right.
Stevie Wonder, is this amazing musician. There was a Stevie Wonder song that my daughter, who's 33, came into the house singing, and I joined in and sang with her, and she was stunned because to her, this was too new of a song for me to even know what it was. And she would not accept the idea that it was an old song.
Right.
That that's not
Yeah.
possible because, you're old and ancient, Dad, and this is new stuff that's hip and cool. Stevie, Curtis Mayfield is another, artist I think is a genius. I even put, James Brown at his height in that category because these 3, for me, were also political
Right.
and were not afraid to use their art for activism. I add Marvin Gaye because Marvin Gaye was also romantic like me, and he found a way to be political and express love in the same space, that they weren't, counter each other. To be able to do that, to say what's going on, and to say it in a way that you feel like somebody hugs you, but also interrogates you at the same time, that's not easy to do. Musicians of that caliber were my earliest influences. But my major influence was a woman who had to get a GED to graduate from high school before going to nursing school, my mother. She was the first artist I ever met. But we didn't call it art, What she did in our space was really about surviving. She would, if she was in charge of the church play, she might take the curtains down off the windows and use them to make a costume, She might go through the lost and found and rip up clothing and then sew it back together to make the rest of the costume. Or she might use it to make a stuffed animal to then sell to raise money to buy something. She was always, we didn't know we were poor. We thought that we had something to eat different every day because of how many ways she could fix a potato. So this woman's, the way she used creativity to survive at a level that made life a little different from the neighbor because they weren't being creative. They were eating the same kind of potato every day and thinking they had a low quality of life. We thought we were rich because she just spun it a little differently. That was eye-opening for me, Not so for me, I raised children who were creative problem solvers, and I think that's, I kind of think of myself as that person in the real world. So I'm always just trying to perfect being creative, but I need my creativity not to happen for creative sake. I'm not making art for art's sake. My art is not propaganda, but it has intentionality connected to it. And I'm trying to fix something. I'm really invested in a desire to help with healing. I'm attracted to things that are broken, so I can help fix it. You know, I
Mhm,
think that's why I'm here. You know, it's like that commercial where people are running and then the soldiers are running to the explosion. You know, it's like behind those soldiers are poets, I think, you know. You know, they're going with their pencil and they're like, you know, we're gonna help fix this too. You know, that's how I see what I'm doing. I don't know how else to do it. As crazy as it might be, it makes me feel safe.
Wonderful. We appreciate you taking your time to come visit us here in Savannah, and I think that's a wrap.
Thank you for the gifts.